Hi, it's Mike Power with Silver Range. In this episode, Dick and I recount the early history of Cortez. We hear about a pair of USGS geologists who are more like prospectors and a pair of prospectors who outfoxed their rivals.
So where are we off to today, Dick?
Well, we're heading to Cortez, which is a very early Carlin type discovery. And in the words of one of the early participants, a thrilling tale. So the Cortez District is located about 65 miles southwest of Elko in Lander and Eureka counties. The heart of the district is in between Grass and Crescent Valleys. It's on the west side of the Cortez Mountains. And there's a small gap there between the Cortez Mountains and the Toyabe Range. The Cortez Mountains are dominated by a mountain called Mount Tenabo, which is a prominent landmark. It's also known as the Nevada Giant. That mountain's 9,157 feet tall, so it's quite a large mountain tip. The early history of the district began in 1863 when a professional prospecting party led by a fellow named Andrew Veach left out of Austin to prospect for valuable mineral deposits. These guys were professionals. They had been financed to the tune of $80,000 in today's dollars by Virginia City, Nevada, and California gold rush veterans. So there were 9 people in all. Andrew Veach was the head of the party, and they were very systematic. So they systematically worked their way to the north out of Austin up Grass Valley, and imagine they continued to Mount Tenabo and found some pretty strongly mineralized material there and staked some claims. But they continued onward about 4 miles to an area called Mill Canyon. And in Mill Canyon, there were quite obvious veins, and they were well defined, and they had some fantastic values. And in addition to that, Mill Canyon had water, so that's where they developed the first mines and built the first mill. Should be mentioned that there was a fellow named Simon Wenban, and he was one of the original group, and he was appointed as superintendent of the mining operation by the investors, and he ended up owning these mines and being involved in them for about 40 years. Another important part of the story, the other thing about Simon Wenban, just for you geologists out there, is that everyone probably has heard of the Devonian Wenban limestone, which is named after him. But anyway, George Hurst was one of the early investors, and he actually held a controlling interest in the claim blocks up at the Tenabo area, Mount Tenabo. And in 1867, Wenban bought his interest, and that consolidated Wenban's ownership. And it's said that the wealth from Cortez was said to be one of the cornerstones of the Hearst fortune. So I find that pretty interesting. In addition, initially the ore was, quote, rebellious, and it took quite a while to work through the metallurgical issues. And I suspect that, the early days when they weren't making much money and it looked like it was going to be a problem, probably discouraged Hearst from worrying about this too much. And it also indicates that maybe a lot of the initial investors kind of lost interest in time as well and allowed Wenban to control the properties. But it turned out that in 1886, they transferred all the operations back to Mount Tenabo, which had the real big ore deposits, and they built a 50-ton per day mill, and it continued to operate at high levels until the turn of the century. So I do want to note that there was over 75 years of continuous production from Cortez, and I believe I read somewhere that that was the longest running mine, continuously producing mine / district in Nevada. So production over the first 40 years was about 7.4 million ounces of silver and quite a bit of lead. And over the last 35 years was about 4 million ounces of silver. So over 10 million ounces of silver was produced. And there's one quote that has the district production valued at about $14 million from between 1862 to 1958. They were carbonate replacement deposits, which we now call CRDs.
So the Cortez silver mine had a long, illustrious history of production. Were there any other mines in the district?
Yeah, there was a couple. There's what was called the Tanabo camp on the east side of Crescent Valley, and that was discovered in 1907 and produced until about 1912. And there was also placer gold discovered in that area, and that was mined for about 20 years. And interestingly, another area where they tried dredging in the 1930s. I also wanted to note that Tanabo is now known as Robertson, and that Nevada Gold Mines just received their permit to develop an open pit mine there. But I guess probably one of the more significant discoveries in the area was the Gold Acres mine. Mining began, Gold Acres is also on the west side of Crescent Valley. And the mining began in 1935 as an underground operation and later switched to open pit. Very interesting thing about the Gold Acres mine is that in 1939, Vanderberg, in his publication Reconnaissance of Mining Districts in Lander County, Nevada, noted that, quote, Gold Acres is one of the recent developments which include discovery and exploitation of gold deposits in sedimentary rocks that can't be panned and were overlooked by the early prospectors. And so this is probably one of the earliest references to Carlin type disseminated gold deposits. And this will also become important later in the story.
Sounds like we're drifting into geology now. What's the geological setting in this area?
Well, I believe it's probably worth starting in 1960 when Ralph Roberts with the USGS published his seminal paper called Alignment of Mining Districts in North Central Nevada. And in the paper, he describes the Roberts Mountains Thrust Fault, which is a large regional flatline structure. And Paleozoic deep water clastic rocks of the western assemblage, which we call the upper plate, are thrust over relative shelf facies carbonate rocks, which we call the lower plate. The lower plate carbonate platform rocks form the western edge of the North American Craton. The faulting that occurred, the Roberts Mountains thrust occurred in the Mississippian time due to the antler orogeny. And in his paper, Ralph notes that erosion through the Roberts Mountains thrust has exposed windows into the lower plate along the two principal trends in North Central Nevada, known today as the Battle Mountain Eureka Trend and the Harlan Trend. And he also noted that principal mining districts along these belts or trends are generally in and around these lower plate windows. So the main mining area at Cortez are in what is called the Cortez window, and at Gold Acres, it's called the Gold Acres window. So that's going to be a very important characteristic of the geology of the area. And most of the ore that was mined at Cortez was classic manto and chimney style replacements. And those replacements were mainly in the Cambrian Hamburg dolomite, but some of the mineralization also leaked through the dolomite into the quartzite and also into the overlying Hanson Creek Formation. Should be noted that there is also a large Jurassic quartz monzonite intrusion in the area. And there's also numerous tertiary intrusions. Gold Acres is in the Shoshone Range to the west, and mineralization was described in Roberts' paper as being in a brecciated zone along the Roberts Mountains thrust. So if you might recall, Mike, as we talked about in the Carlin Discovery Tales episode, this paper influenced John Livermore in his search for disseminated gold deposits.
Right.
And he visited Gold Acres in 1961. And this visit, Ralph Roberts' paper and discussions with the Gold Acres personnel undoubtedly helped steer him into the Carlin area and the discovery of the Carlin deposit. There is some recent geological events that have a direct bearing on the discovery in the area as well. There's some large basin range extensional faults, one of them being the large Cortez fault, which down drops the Cortez Mountains to the west into a pediment, and also the Crescent fault in Crescent Valley, which forms the east edge of the valley. And I think that fault has over 10,000 feet of offset. So that's a major fault.
Yeah.
The Cortez fault will become important in the story as well.
Right. And to get back to that story, we had a silver base metal mine that operated into the late 50s, I gather, and then this strange gold mine with invisible gold ore that operated into about the same time, towards around 1960. And I gather that that's when the whole Cortez story really got started.
Yeah, the story of the Cortez mine is a story of two separate and unrelated threads, which end up eventually intersecting and resulting in the discovery. Probably the most important thread of the story began in 1959 when USGS geologists initiated a project studying geochemical halos around deposits. And this initial work was focused on identifying geochemical patterns in barren rocks above and adjacent to potentially blind or buried ore deposits, such as ones that might be underneath thrust faults. Well, the Cortez area was chosen as appropriate for study, partially due to Ralph Roberts' paper and its geological observations. A fellow named Ralph Erickson and Al Maranzino did some initial reconnaissance of the area in 1959 and determined that this would be a really good place to run their a sampling program in their studies. So they went out and initiated this program in the upper plate of the Roberts Mountains thrust west of the Cortez mines in 1960. Their sampling techniques were rather unconventional for the time and consisted of doing things like scraping iron oxides off of fractures and analyzing juniper berries and caliche, and they also high graded where it was possible, did heavy media separations, and had relatively unorthodox sampling methods. So in spite of this, or maybe because of it, they did actually detect some geochemical anomalies. So concurrently in another thread, there was a family company called Idaho Mining Corporation, and they were interested in the Cortez areas. And the company was consisted of two brothers who had owned and sold a uranium mine in Colorado. And they had moved their families to Reno and were interested in continuing their successful mineral exploration enterprise in Nevada. They were really creative and savvy for their time, and they did a lot of research and determined that they thought there was potential for the downdropped and offset portion of the rich silver lead ore bodies of the old Cortez mines into the pediment west of Mount Tenabo, west of the Cortez Fault, and they decided to stake the area. Well, in the meantime, there was a lot of local geologic interest in Erickson and Maranzino's work on the Cortez area. And Erickson decided to give an informal talk at a pub in Reno in April of 1961 to the local AIME section. Their papers were due to be released later that year. Erickson talked in the meeting about the results that they'd had and mentioned the possibility that the anomalies they had detected could be leakage halos along above concealed mineral deposits. Well, the Idaho mining guys realized this talk was likely to draw considerable interest in the area, and they had previously loaded up their Jeep pickup and an international travel haul with claim posts and field gear. And so immediately after the talk, they headed directly for Cortez, and upon arriving, they got a few hours of sleep and at daylight began staking the Pixie group of claims. And sure enough, by the middle of the next day, landmen, geologists, and claim stakers started arriving, but they found Idaho's claim post strategically located along the county road and rapidly became discouraged and left. So another thread of the story involves American Exploration and Mining Company, or AMEX, which was a subsidiary of Placer Development and which later became Placer Dome. And they had taken a lease on the old Cortez mines in 1957. The property at that point was mostly patented claims, but there were some unpatented mining claims. But they were looking at the lower levels of the Cortez mine, as well as doing research in the upper plate rocks, which had some turquoise prospects on them. In 1963, Amex ended up completing a joint venture with Idaho Mining, which led to the formation of the Cortez JV, or the CJV. And I think it was pretty much just to consolidate their holdings in the area.
I gather the discussion had was one of those complementary discussions where one group had the money and the other group had the ground?
I think so. I seem to remember reading that somewhere.
Anyway, so they started this JV in 63, you said?
Yeah. So in the meantime, Erickson had been continuing his pioneering work in geochemistry and had expanded it to the Getchell mine. And there they determined that anomalous concentrations of arsenic, antimony, tungsten were closely associated with the gold ore. And so they were starting to think they were onto something. They also collected samples from Gold Acres, which we previously discussed, and the Bootstrap mine in Carlin. And these samples confirmed their findings. So they felt they had a valid model, and they continued to develop it at Cortez. So they retrieved their older Cortez samples and reanalyzed them and found that they were also anomalous in the same trace elements. But this time they also analyzed them for gold, and they got up to 14 ppm. Apparently, though, AMAX was not excited about these results due to the unconventional methods that have been used to collect and analyze the samples. So they kind of blew it off. In addition, they had switched their sampling area from the upper plate of stratigraphy at Cortez into the lower plate rocks. Well, they were excited, so they mobilized a whole nother sampling effort and headed out to Cortez and analyzed, or I think it was over 200 samples that they collected. And one of the samples contained 3.4 ounces per ton, and quite a few of the others were highly anomalous. Which
Good work for the USGS, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting that they've helped find things back then. Well, at this point, the CJV had no exploration success to speak of, but in fact, they were looking for strategic minerals, which they were using government loans under a program called the Office of Mineral Exploration. It was run by the USGS, and that was during the Cold War, obviously. Work that had been completed by the JV, therefore, was solely focused on strategic minerals, and gold wasn't even analyzed for. And so in the meantime, with the lack of success, the CJV had been relinquishing most of the property back to Idaho Mining by early in 1966. Well, the USGS related their findings to the CJV, and it was quickly realized that the gold anomalies were on claims that had already been given up by the JV to the Idaho Mining Group.
Sounds like set up for an Old West showdown.
Yes, I believe so, because in August of 1966, the Idaho mining principals, Cole McFarland, who was the president of AMEX, a couple of his subordinates, and Ralph Erickson of the USGS met at the discovery outcrop at the edge of Crescent Valley. In the words of the Idaho mining men, the discussion went something like this. Us. Well, once again, we have the land and no money, but this time we have the anomaly. Them. Well, we still have the money and the expertise, but we have no anomaly. Us. All right, we will deed the claims back to you, but you must promise to drill 12 holes at least 300 feet deep. Them. No. Us. 6 holes, 200 feet deep. Them. No. Us. 3 holes, 100 feet deep. Them. No. 1 hole, 100 feet deep. Us. Ouch. Okay. So the hole was collared on the outcrop and luckily returned 100 feet of half ounce of gold per ton. And this was the discovery hole for the Cortez deposit and has led to a chain of discoveries and mine openings, which continue to the present.
Wow, that's a wonderful story, Dick, that one.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the initial resource that was announced in 1968 was approximately 3.4 million tons at 0.29 ounce per ton, or pretty darn close to 1 million ounces. So yeah, by that time, Carlin had been discovered as well, but with the low gold price, new discoveries were pretty much kept to a minimum until Nixon deregulated the price of gold in 1971.
What lessons can we learn from this very interesting story?
Well, for me, there a lot of it involved out of the box thinking on several fronts. For mostly self-educated Idaho mining guys to target the down drop portion of the old historic mines showed some real foresight some 60 years ago. And, I still stress to younger folks I work with to be imaginative and creative and envisioning areas where deposits could be hiding. Technical methods of targeting are definitely advancing with AI and whatnot, but sometimes human creativity is pretty awesome. The concurrent government research activity by Ralph Roberts and Ralph Erickson can't be underestimated either. And I guess the lesson there is that geologists need to stay current with research and ideas. And I also wonder, just as an aside, if government will ever reinvent itself and start doing this kind of scientific research that's designed to help find these critical minerals that U.S. is going to need as it moves into the green era.
I got to say, I was very gratified to read Barrick's 2022 NI 43-101 report on the whole Cortez District and note with interest that Idaho Mining Corporation is still getting a very small slice of that pie. Really nice to see the little guys win. So anyway, I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of this story. What are we going to do next?
Well, I'm thinking that now that we're a roll at Cortez, we may look into continuing this tale. I'd also like to thank the former principals of the Idaho Mining Company for all their help in providing important details for this discussion. And on one final note, I would like to recommend the book, Historical Archaeology in the Cortez Mining District Under the Nevada Giant. There's an excellent account of the history and the way folks lived back then. And if you like mining history, it's a must read.
Well, thanks very much, Dick. Really looking forward to hearing the rest of this story. So long.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Talk to you soon.
Next time, watch Cortez grow from 1 million to over 50 million ounces.